14th interest rate rise might be on the cards.
I would say is likely on the cards.
Definitely. Yeah, I would be surprised. I'm going to say I would also be, I don't know if disappointed is the right word. I just don't think the RBA has gone hard enough. Full stop.
Okay. Well, before we start...
But I would be disappointed if they don't.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
So for context, since May 2022, Australia has had 13 interest rate rises. We've all felt it. We've all heard about it. The next RBA meeting on their new 6-week cycle calendar is scheduled for the 5th to the 6th of August. And at the end of that meeting, we'll have their next interest rate decision. Rewind 6 months, and everyone thought we'd have an interest rate cut by this time. But when the facts change, opinions do as well. In this case, the facts that have changed is that inflation is stubbornly high. In May, the annual inflation rate actually ticked up to 4%. So now the likelihood is maybe another interest rate rise. And the question that comes out of that is, if 13 interest rate rises didn't change anything, will the 14th?
Well, they probably need to go 14 to 15 pretty quickly. I think as well, to confuse things, the unemployment rate's just ticked up as well. So that's what the RBA want to see.
But you do have to dig under the hood of that, because we actually created more jobs. 50,000 new jobs created. It's just that the amount of job seekers with immigration and the participation rate increasing, that number rose faster. So we're still adding more jobs.
And wages are still running.
This is a big concern that I think Australia has that parts of the rest of the world don't have, which is the longer the inflation story plays out and the less time we take to get it under control, the increased likelihood of a wage price spiral, where because inflation is more sticking around for longer, people have more time to feel the effects, to go to their boss to negotiate a rise, which then is the spark of the wage price spiral.
Yeah. So let's answer the question. Will it make a difference? Will it change anything? And to do that, it's important that we look at what is actually contributing to the 4% CPI indicator. And
before we even look at the categories, the economic theory behind raising interest rates is demand destruction. That's the economic term for essentially we're going to make people hurt until they stop spending. You can see why they use the euphemistic term demand destruction, because it is an incredibly blunt instrument. We're going to raise the price of debt, and in particular in Australia, like mortgage stress has gone up, and people have stopped spending on other things as a result. At the same time, it also incentivizes savers to save more because they get a better rate of return. So that's the economic theory, and that would be the theory behind the next rate rise. So with that in mind, what's actually driving inflation in Australia?
So the most significant price rises were housing, up 5.2%, food and non-alcoholic beverages, up 3.3%, transport, up 4.9%, and alcohol and tobacco, up 6.7%.
Yeah, now I put an asterisk next to alcohol and tobacco because if you look at the subcategories, the biggest driver of that was tobacco, which was up 12%, and that's government driven.
Yeah.
So obviously that is inflationary, but I feel like that's probably less relevant to the conversation as some of those other categories, because that price was going up whether people were buying it or not.
Yeah.
So housing, food, and transport, and the key subcategory under transport is fuel. They're not exactly discretionary purchases, are they?
Not at all. This is the big problem as well. These are what you would call inelastic categories, and that means essentially that despite changes in price, the demand for that good or service doesn't really change.
Yes.
Despite rents going up, despite housing prices going up, the demand for that is not going to change. Despite groceries at Woolies and Coles going up, we need to eat, we need to buy. So the demand is not going to change. So to your point, Ren, around demand destruction, a lot of the CPI or the inflation here are in these inelastic categories. Rents up 7.7%, electricity up 5.2%, health up 4.1%, insurance up 8.2%. 4 categories there that we need to live.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So raising rates is not going to change my need for insurance.
Yeah.
It's not going to change my
Yeah. They're inelastic because the demand is inelastic. Whatever the price is, the demand doesn't change, and so therefore, the demand destruction that we're hoping to see, we may not see even if we get a 14th and a 15th rate rise. Obviously, like at some point, people are just buying less, and that's the demand destruction. But if we flip it around, what we've done is had a look at the other categories, which you would say are more elastic. So demand changes based on price. And here are some of the subcategories that I think tell the story. Recreation and culture, down 0.6%. Holiday, travel and accommodation, down 3.9%. Furnishings and household equipment and services, only up 0.1%. And clothing and footwear, only up 0.3%.
stark differences.
So where demand is more elastic, the demand destruction is already happening.
The challenge is, and I think obviously the RBA are going to consider this. They have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
in the same breath, it's not sustainable to have inflation at that 4 or ticking up anyway for the next 12 months.
And there is an additional pressure that has sort of arisen in the past few weeks that I think is also going to put pressure on them to raise, because they're now out of sync with most of the rest of the world. So the US is making very strong overtures that they're going to cut. Inflation is back within the Fed's target range. At least their preferred measure of inflation is back within their target range. And unemployment is ticking up in the US. And Jerome Powell has said that he's watching that and is concerned. So everyone is pretty confident September, or by September, the Fed will cut. Europe, similar story. It's looking like inflation is back within target and high expectations of a cut. Australia doesn't want to be out of sync with the rest of the world for a few reasons, but importantly, one, if we do raise while everyone else is cutting, the Aussie dollar gets stronger. That's not good for our exporters. If you look at the share price of our miners, they've already had a pretty tough year. So that's going to be a concern. But also other things that we export, i.e., like education and stuff like that, get more expensive. And there's also going to be just like general political pressure if we have inflation high and are raising rates and the rest of the world is cutting.
Political pressure on both sides, I think, going into election year next year.
Well, there was talk, so it needs to be done by like August or September 2025, the next federal election. But there was talk that Albanese was going to call a snap election at the end of this year after some good economic news.
Nope.
But that talk is all gone because the good economic news remains
It's not there.
Hypothetical.
Yes.
So I think, look, that's the context that you need to know going into this RBA meeting in a couple of weeks that we'll all be watching. There's going to be certainly plenty of press coverage about it. But prepare yourself for a rate rise.
Yeah, we're on bullock watch.
And prepare yourself for that rate rise, perhaps not doing enough, and then another conversation about another
I think
rate
if they
rise
do
happening.
it, I would bet if they do it, they'll do 2.
You reckon they'll do a double, or they'll go back to back?
Back to back. I reckon if they do, they'll go back to back. Bang, bang. We're nowhere near as high as the US or Europe got to. Both of them are back to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Enough said.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.